Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening.
Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. I have a very special return guest. Brannon Braga came on to talk about his super underrated adaptation of Clive Barker's The Books of Blood, which personally, in my opinion, the Hulu movie had a really interesting way of doing a narrative device for the anthology story that we hadn't seen before. And it really impressed me. And so I do want to send people back to that episode to hear Brannon talk about that, because especially writers, if you're here for writing content, and I know most of you are, to hear writers get under the hood, that is a really good one. And that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to get under the hood of Orville season 3, which now I was a fan of the first 2 seasons of the Orville, but season 3 just knocked my socks off. Now, we're going to get into, and if you want to hear biographical stuff, I did a little bit of that with Brannon, how he got into stuff. We're not going to do that today. We're going to go pretty much strictly Orville today. Brannon, welcome back to Postcards from a Dying World.
Oh, thrilled to be here again. Thank you.
Now, one cool thing about Orville season 3 is, and I called it my Sci-Fridays. I would watch the Orville on Friday. I didn't watch it right away when it came out, but I would watch it on Fridays in a back-to-back with For All Mankind. And there's a lot of Star Trek vets involved in both those shows. How cool is it that these 2 shows were coming out with you and Joe and Ron and Andre, like you're all, doing things in science fiction at this time? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, that core group of young guys, we're still around doing stuff. So
yeah, really excellent TV, and it made for, very different shows, but very cool for my Friday evening.
Yeah,
but yeah, and when we last talked, you weren't sure, and nobody was sure, that there would be a season 3 of the Orville. So we're gonna mostly just talk about the nitty gritty of writing, but I'm sure some people would like to know, because it had to have informed your choices on how you approached the writing of the season, the fact that you guys weren't even sure that it was going to happen, right?
Well, gosh, I can't remember when we talked last. Season 3 has been in the works for at least 2.5 years.
Well, I can refresh your memory on one thing, that I know you had written many of the episodes, but you weren't sure where it was going to air. I do remember that because,
yeah, it may have been at that time that Seth was still in the process of getting the show moved to Hulu,
right?
And it wasn't resolved, and so I wasn't able to talk about it. But that was the big, when we were breaking the stories for season 3 and starting to talk about the kind of the arcs we wanted to do, he was pretty intent on getting the show off of broadcast television. And I kind of understood it at first. He wanted longer running times, and he didn't want a lot of good stuff was ending up on the cutting room floor, and there were nuances that you couldn't get into with the acting. But pretty quickly I started to realize, this is more than just a move off of broadcast. This is going to be a liberation, storytelling wise. And what happened was, we were able to tell stories with this huge scope and ambition that you just couldn't squeeze into a 48-page script. And our scripts tended to be quite long. I didn't know how in the hell they were going to be produced, because they were so huge. But it was really, from a writing perspective, we just went for it. We really went for it.
Yeah, and we'll get into the individual episodes and how that happened, but it's just, I like the idea that you felt liberated by just being able to, I mean, there's a lot of little ins and outs that people might not realize about writing, that you got to fit breaks here, and then you got to have time for this, and so it makes it almost like exactly like what 48 minutes,
43 minutes about.
Right.
And when you're in that kind of situation, inevitably cuts come in long, and you're cutting stuff out and keeping what is essential to the narrative. And very often great jokes have to go, or a nice character moment, or a scene that was just a little too cool scene, but too tangential. And I'll give you an example of that a bit later, coming up on a season 3 episode. But it also allowed for just more cinema in the visual storytelling. You're seeing these giant action sequences that are feature film worthy. They're just, forgetting the budget and the time it took to make those sequences. You wouldn't have the running time on broadcast to do those sequences. You needed a feature length running time.
Right. And
that was really what Seth was after. I didn't fully realize it till later.
Right. So Seth had made up his mind.
Vision.
He wanted to do this.
He had a vision and to move it to Hulu, and he was really like intent. It was moving off of broadcast. And I remember thinking early on, God, I mean, okay, so we have a little more running time. What's the big deal?
You wrote 170 of those, right?
But it's really only as we got deeper into it that I realized what he had in mind.
Right. And so how many times when you were breaking the stories and doing this, was he having to remind you guys, hey, you can do this now? You can go. You can go. Or did you guys kind of?
I think it just came organically. We just were, but we weren't. It's a subliminal thing. Like when you're working under certain constraints, you don't talk about them. You grasp them on a fundamental level, and you just do it. And even your scripts, when I write a 43-minute running time script, it usually comes out by some miracle, comes out about the right length.
Right.
But in this case, with those subliminal guidelines, parameters gone, it made the storytelling more expansive.
Right.
It just happened. And it started with the first episode where Isaac commits suicide. That's just not a story that you're going to try to cram in between Colgate commercials. It's not a story that you want to take lightly. It's not a subject matter that you want to handle cavalierly. It needed some intimacy and some intricacy in the scene work.
Well, and as Philip K. Dick scholar and podcaster, it was not missed on the PKD community that the episode was called Electric Sheep.
That's right.
And we certainly appreciated the reference. I don't know if that was Seth or who, or
it was Seth. It was Seth. In fact, we talked about it. He wanted to make sure it was the right use of the phrase, and I said yes, very much so.
Yeah,
very much so.
Well, and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is very much about the ethics of artificial life. So that was and animal rights too, but specifically artificial life. And I, so, obviously I appreciated that reference and that first episode. And you're right. That was, and also considering the episode that you wrote first, The Shadow Realms, that was a pretty serious tonal shift to take your fans on at the beginning, especially because, the humor was fairly light in those episodes.
Well,
I apologize for the dog.
Oh, that's okay. He must have heard you mention animal rights.
Yes.
And so, look, Shadow Realms was written as this was long enough ago. I'm having trouble remembering, but that was written for season 2, and we ended up pushing the production of it, I believe. So
Now, I know this because offline you told me about Shadow Realms and saying, just you wait, this is so up your alley about how Lovecraftian and Cronenbergian it was. And I got special joy out of watching that episode.
Yeah, so
you teased it to me.
so yeah, so that episode was actually something of it's an episode Seth very much wanted to make, but due to all sorts of factors, including COVID, it got kind of it got pushed. And so it's a bit of a standalone episode. You know, a lot of season 3 is serialized storytelling to some degree, but that's one where we were, you know, discovering a new species, and it's more of an exploring episode, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you know, like I said, like you kind of teased that one to me, so it was very exciting for me to watch. And I really love that because I know from having watched so many hours of stuff that you've written that you are a horror guy. You like to write horror, and you really got to, for it seemed like for the first time in the Orville, write a horror episode. I mean, this is a very frightening episode of the Orville, and putting your characters in some pretty horrifying situations. So everyone kind of credits this to like that tonal shift of season 3, but you're saying this is one that you guys had conceptualized as far back as season 2.
I think so.
Yeah,
they're meshing together a little bit, but I think so. I don't know. I'd have to I'd have to look, but it definitely was more of a standalone episode. It has some Isaac Clare thematic material in it that I know for sure you know, actually, now that I think about it, that story only worked if they were broken up. So I guess it was a season 3 episode. I don't know. The COVID really screws with the timeline.
right, of course.
It's I feel like I'm in a Philip K. Dick story where my memory is being screwed with, but yeah, I guess it had to be after they broke up, which would be post Identity,
right,
in season 2. So it could be season 2 anyway. It was a fun episode. It was horror. I love horror. I was able to do a bodily transformation. I always like those. Howard Berger, who's our makeup guy, special effects makeup guy, who has a book coming out soon about the history of special effects makeup. A guy who's cut his teeth on Day of the Dead with George Romero, who has worked on so many great movies. So it's such a thrill to work with people like that. That's the best part of my job, really, is meeting these people, you know, and asking questions about how they did stuff.
Totally.
So we had some good aliens and the means to do some of it with CGI enhanced, so it wasn't just guys in suits.
Well, right. And one of the things too about the imagery that you guys came up with is that it reminded me a little bit of the Toby Hooper movie Life Force.
Yep.
With the ships, which was really cool. Like that was a great kind of cool reference. But one of the things is that's based on the Colin Wilson novel, which is very Lovecraftian.
Space vampires.
That's right. And I loved the cosmic dread and feel of it. And I love that you guys set up that episode with talking about the idea of myths and haunted houses and all those things. That was a really smart foreshadowing for what comes in the story. So I really appreciated that aspect of how it was written.
Yeah, I mean, it was the Krill weren't wrong. that there were demonic forces at work, but that's just what they chose to interpret them through a more of a religious lens. But they sure as hell weren't wrong.
Yeah, and I love that conference scene kind of took on like a campfire. The conference room scene kind of took on like a campfire feel to it, and it's funny because it's a great example of breaking the rules of writing to come up with. And I know Star Trek had to do this all the time too, but the show don't tell kind of thing, where that's a scene where the telling is the power of the scene, the Krill telling them the myths and telling them those things. And so that's really cool, like how that worked out.
So much of horror is what they call onset, and dread. I mean, The Exorcist, nothing happens for an hour, it's all dread because
right.
Because something bad's going to happen. You heard how horrific the movie was. If you're old enough to remember seeing it when it came out, I was an unfortunate, I think I was 9. Never should have snuck into that movie. But a lot of it you got to set up the dread. And this was an episode where the audience really knew nothing about this new species. So, and the Krill themselves are kind of scary. So what could they be afraid of?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that's cool too about the Orville is you guys aren't afraid to nod to the things that you love and are influenced by. And I especially, and there's so many like that. There's that Lovecraft feel. There's that kind of cosmic horror thing going on. But one of the things that's really cool too, for me as a defender of Star Trek the Motion Picture, the scene where they went in really reminded me of going into Voyager. And one of the things about that movie that I think is underrated is that's a really, if you really get into the shoes of everybody going onto the ship, whether you're talking motion picture, you're talking to the Orville, that's a frightening thing to do.
Yeah.
To take your ship into that. And the dread was really fully realized, and I liked also that the musical score kind of nodded to Jerry Goldsmith a little bit too.
Well, that's all set, and he may have been thinking Voyager when he was working with the composer. I don't know. You'd have to ask him, but there's no need to defend the motion picture. I would hope at this point that people recognize that it's a great movie.
Yeah.
With the sexiest Enterprise of them all, and my favorite of them anyway, and just a great score, a defining score, and a storyline that is really mysterious and interesting. And
it is absolutely the most science fiction Star Trek ever got.
And a mature, almost Kubrickian, Stanley Kubrick-like sensibility to it. And the perfect thing that they picked it up later on. Like, don't pretend like it's tomorrow on. Like, I like that they embraced the 9 or 10 years that had gone by.
Yeah.
And kind of picked up the character. I think it's a great movie. I love that movie. And that a brand new restoration just came out.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm glad we got a chance to defend the motion picture, because I also am a big fan, and I always defend it as being the most science fiction of Star Trek. And one of the things I love about the motion picture is it gets the grandiose size of space, more than any other Star Trek did. And I appreciated that.
We could do a whole podcast on this movie, because I mean, what a tough thing. Like, what are you going to do? Like, what story is going to satisfy? I think maybe people were a little bummed that the crew wasn't coherent like they used to be. Maybe it wasn't as funny. I don't know what it was, but it was, what story was going to satisfy everybody, on that one.
Yeah.
But you had Kirk on the bridge of a new Enterprise. What, I mean, that's enough.
Yeah, it should be enough. Yeah. All right. So, one of the things too that I liked in Shadow Realms is Dr. Finn is very fierce in the end, and so that storyline with her and her ex, who's the admiral. What's really good about that is as horrific as the episode is, to have a very human story at the center of it is a very important counterbalance to make sure that we have kind of a point of view in the story. So I wonder if you could tell me about what you guys were thinking with Dr. Finn in specifically Shadow Realms.
We were looking for an ex of hers to come aboard, and we knew he would get infected first. And we were playing, I think, a little bit with expectations of, is she going to reach the humanity inside him? And in this case, no. She wasn't going to reach him necessarily. She was going to require threatening to kill him. But there's one great line. It's successful in what it's trying to do, but I don't think it's like the greatest scene in the world. But it does have one great line where she says something about, I'm stubborn. I'll kill you. And
right.
But yeah, I mean, it kind of needed that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And also it kind of kept the Isaac Claire dynamic alive too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I appreciate about where you guys are at in this storyline at this point too is that right now, like, this is only the second episode of this season, so I think that whether you intended for it for an earlier season or not, what it does here is it had everyone spending a little bit of time being like, whoa, the Orville is pretty serious now, or they're taking this pretty seriously now. And it's funny because I know some people were like, where's the humor going to go? And then the next episode, which we're not going to get too deep into because you didn't write it, but, is a pretty funny episode. And so, I really liked the balance that this season had where, we're kind of going back and forth with some of these tonal shifts. They worked for me. They really.
I think they totally work. I mean, the balance Seth intended was always have to be. It was going to be heavier on the drama and the science fiction storytelling, and with the comedy frosting. Some episodes, like the final one of this season, which Seth wrote, has Bortus dressed as Elvis. I mean, I don't know how more broad you can get. It's hilarious, but not all the episodes are that way. And when something serious is going on,
all kidding aside,
it isn't a satire of science fiction. I mean, it is science fiction. At least that's our goal.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that too. Is that there's been a couple times where I've talked to people who have maybe seen a few episodes here and there, and they refer to it as satire. And I always correct them and say, no, it's not satire. It's not a satire show. It's not a spoof of science fiction. It is science fiction. It is a science fiction show. And one of the cool things is that you guys don't have the weight of a pre-existing franchise to kind of, do what you want to do. Whereas, to give people the people that want more Star Trek, want more Star Wars, they want more of these things, but here's a new version. Now we're not weighted down by canon, and we can do what we want, a little bit. Yeah. And so that's one of the fun things about that. So now, okay, so Gently Falling Rain was the next episode that you and Andre wrote. This was the first one that prompted me to send you an email and just be like, whoa, dude, that was great. And part of it was, and you guys could have had no idea what the timing was going to be of this episode coming out, and what was going on in the real world with the 1/6 committee, with the January 6th committee, and with the Supreme Court changing the abortion laws and all these things. And what people have to realize and understand is that you guys had written this a long time before that. You filmed it a long time before that. And the timing is just kind of coincidental.
Shocking. I mean, there's a scene with dealing with abortion, which is a scene that, by the way, probably wouldn't have made it to broadcast possibly because of the subject matter, but certainly for running time. That's one of those scenes that goes.
Yeah.
But it was pure coincidence. I mean, the Roe v. Wade decision was overturned, and that episode aired a few days later. I mean, that's how close it was. We wrote this episode after, not, maybe a year or two after Trump was elected. I mean, that's how long ago this episode was written. And so none of the things that are most resonant politically, socio-politically about the episode, we could have foreseen. It just happens that way sometimes.
Right. And when we get into the episode, we'll get more to that, because Talea's role and that, that opening scene where she's riling up the crowd and she's doing all that, like, considering that this is airing during a time when the 1/6 committee is happening. And look, you're a Twilight Zone guy. I know you are, Brandon. You're a Twilight Zone.
I was just raving about an episode today.
Yes, you're a Twilight Zone guy. And how many times did this happen to Rod Serling, right? He wrote, Where the Monsters Are Due on Maple Street long before, it got into the consciousness and things were going on and people were seeing it come to life. And that opening speech that Talea gives is very chilling when you've just been watching the 1/6 committee on the news earlier that day. And and so the idea of turning someone that Ed, had feelings for, or had been in this situation with before, and turning her into the Trump, I'm sure that was a writer's room decision, I'm sure, when you guys were breaking story, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So this is something that you guys all talked about, but that's a pretty serious decision narratively to do that. And I'm kind of interested in, did you guys have concerns about bringing her in, or did it just make sense from the beginning?
Made total sense. I mean, first of all, she is a Krill who was in a unique position in that she lived amongst the humans. She got a bird's eye view of what they're really all about, and she came out a little bit of a hero. And I've read some comments online. How could a school teacher become a leader of Krill? And it's like, there's some presidents in our history who's had humble beginnings. I mean, it's not I think, valid criticism at all.
They don't all have to be reality TV stars.
Yeah, exactly. But we knew we wanted a child to be part of it, an Ed Talea child.
Well, remember, Hitler was a cartoonist.
Hitler was a cartoonist, and Ronald Reagan was a B movie actor.
Yep.
So nothing against B movie actors, but but we knew we wanted to continue that relationship. But we knew, I don't remember how we concocted all of the elements, but we thought it would be cool that Talea would become this kind of leader of the Krill, and a radical, and have this secret love child.
Right. And one of the cool things that you guys have done with the Orville, which is that with Dr. Finn having a relationship with a very robotic looking robot and Ed having had this child with a very alien, Krill, is, I love that on the Orville, you guys have just, like, in this future, that people they're just not going to notice that thing. They're just, well, not going to care.
It is just, it really is a testament to the human imagination that we even accept these things, because a guy in this goofy robot suit, and it's a testament to Penny's acting, that any of it works at all.
Yeah.
And that it would be emotionally engaging at all is kind of a miracle, that it all comes together. And it doesn't always, but it's what I love about so much about science fiction.
Mhm.
It just allows you to look at love in a new way, at heartbreak in a new way.
Well, and I'm wondering too, because yeah, Penny's performances in this show are really incredible, and her growth as an actress, I just think is so impressive. And even just in the time that you've been doing the Orville, like what she's been able to sell in that character as Dr. Finn has been really impressive. I'm sure you guys have written to that as
Oh
you,
yeah.
yeah, as you.
Oh, Seth always had Penny in mind for that role. Always.
Mhm.
It was a done deal. Like so we always, yeah, we write to Penny.
Yeah. And she totally delivers. And I think selling it's funny because people will talk about, your Meryl Streeps, these big actors, but has she ever had to sell a romance with a robot like that? Like,
Or a blob, or a CGI blob,
right,
It's like,
right.
and by the way, Penny is just unflappable about it all. Like she's committed.
Yeah. And it's there on screen. Um, it's really good. Now one of the things about, yeah, so when the beggars on the street of Krill, like this was a little detail for me, but it was something that when I'm watching the Orville, and yeah, when I knew I was going to talk to you, I went back and watched, and I took a few notes here. And so, but one of the things that I thought was really, really important about some of the nitty gritty details that you guys got there was, for example, the beggars on the streets and the fact that there were krill that wanted peace, that were doing those things. These little details seem like things that you might not have been able to do without the running time, for
That's right.
example. Right.
That's a great insight. Yeah. Look, we talked about Krill being a kind of a capitalist society and a successful one. It's a free market society. They, there are some references to its grand marketplace, and they're very proud of it. And it's a kind of a glitzy place,
Mm.
when you're coming in for a landing. There's a lot of Blade Runner kind of vibe there. But we definitely scripted in that there were homeless people,
Mm-hmm.
and that there were certain aspects to the society that would give it a little extra dimension. Things aren't perfect here. It isn't a planet of these people. There are differing opinions, and that you can't do that in the shorter running time. You've got to just get to the story, get to the daughter, I mean, where would you cut? I don't know where that came in, 70 minutes, 75. I don't know how long that one ended up being, but where would you cut a half hour out?
Right. Yeah.
Of that episode? Where would it come? And you
So,
would start targeting some moments that gave it dimension.
right. And probably in the past, you might have been like, oh, we're going to have to push this out and do a two-parter or something like that. And then you have to sacrifice other episodes. So what's cool here is that, by pushing that running time and sort of having a movie, and it's funny too, because when you put on the episode and you see the runtime as a fan, you're like, oh, that's awesome. I get another 22 minutes, and that's a nice feeling. But as far as that societal thing goes, too, one of the interesting aspects is, even though the krill have the kind of the regressive views on abortion and those kinds of things, it doesn't mean that Talea isn't able to eventually, confront the Mocklins about, their culture. And it's one of the cool things that you guys got to invent these new cultures and explore those things. And we'll get back into that when we get to Domino, because that is one we're really going to want to talk about. But as far as the abortion thing goes, you're right. I mean, broadcast TV, that would have been, well, still like,
I'm not sure. By the way,
I'm not sure what you would have ended up with there.
Look, the scene is it's a horrifying scene. The scene was not to make a political statement, but a cultural statement. I mean, Talea, in her culture, it's something you don't do for whatever reason, whether it's illegal or punishable, or you believe it on a deeply spiritual level. It's a horrifying scene to any rational person, but that's how it is there.
Well, and I can tell, and I know you guys are so close to it because you wrote it and you're out there, but watching the conversation that happened around this episode on Twitter, that people are contemplating like having to donate money to funds to take people across state lines. We have that case of the 10-year-old from Ohio that had to go to Indiana, and and you have all these things going on. So it really hit home with people, and I think that there was a certain degree of comfort that fans of the show felt from being like, like our show sees how we're feeling, even though you didn't know because you wrote it so long ago. But I think it was really important timing.
It was, I don't want to call it lucky timing because there's nothing lucky about what's happening. But initially, that was an idea that we talked about, that Seth initially thought maybe we would do a whole episode about this. And, but we couldn't figure out how to get into whatever culture it was that had these views, and he was particularly interested in the form of the punishment and somehow getting our people involved. And it just we could never quite get it into a full-fledged episode. But we realized, well, let's just take what's best about that idea and make it part of our story in this episode, because it fit perfectly because of the child. Talea leaves her perch to take Ed down to show him this, which is a little awkward, but then again, it is their kid and she wants to make a point.
Right. Well, and I think what's interesting, that and a good note for writers out there, is that you couldn't fix this. You couldn't figure out how to nail down the story as its own thing. And you found a way to work it where it made perfect sense in this other story. And that is a writer's trick for solving things with, if you like, I know I've got a good idea here and I may not be able to build a whole thing out of it, but I can find a way to put it in here. And then it makes perfect sense because it sets up storylines with Ed and Talea in the future where, the daughter is always going to be a weight between them. It's always going to be a thing between them, but it's also, and here's what's genius about it, it's also a connection between the two cultures, because now you have a person who is part human and part krill.
Right.
And so what looked like a problem, I can't fix this episode, I can fix the whole show. I can help the whole show out by putting it in here. Very smart decision.
Well, it also is a testament to writerly patience, because when we talked about that abortion idea as an episode, it would come up again and again, and we'd talk about it. And at some point, you just have to move on and say, well, it'll come back. If it's a good idea, it'll rear its head again, but we have to move on. It's not working. Right. And sometimes, whether you're writing a scene that isn't working or talking about an idea, at some point you move on, and maybe you'll never talk about it again, or maybe you'll see how it should be used. And that just takes a certain amount of discipline and patience, and accepting that something's not working in the moment.
How often, when you were sitting there spinning these ideas, did you guys ever just like smile at each other and go, this is really radical science fiction?
We're not that self-congratulatory, but I do think,
because the fans do that, we do that.
I mean, look, I always thought Seth's conception of the Mocklins was solid gold. Like, and I'm happy to see, and perhaps my favorite thing about the Orville is the Klyden and Bortus relationship, which is
we'll drill down on that in a little bit.
Which is just a wonderful aspect of the show, and I do think when
you wrote their best scene, by the way, and I'm going to come back to that.
Okay, but I do think when we were working out the story for About a Girl in season 1 with the sex change, Topa's sex change, we knew it was going to be a defining moment for the show, because it was risky. It was, and it was a later episode that Seth moved up in the air date because he wanted to make a declaration. This is what the show is. And, but that was the closest we ever came to, like, okay, well, we're going to try this, and we're going to end it this way, and it's going to be really dicey and controversial.
So with Tale of Two Topas, one of the things I'm wondering about is, especially in this world now today, we all have people in our lives that are going through some of these situations and these things. I think a lot of people felt really seen in the Tale of Two Topas story and Midnight Blue, in the transgender community. So I'm wondering, like, do you guys have somebody in your orbit who was there to help you guys with that aspect of the story? Because it comes off very personal.
I can't speak for Seth. I mean, I know some transgender people. I mean, I know, I remember when Orville first premiered, I had a limo driver who had transitioned, and was really grateful for the storyline, even though it was in its infancy, so to speak, at that time. Seth was very cognizant of being sensitive to how this was being executed. Were people going to, the person playing Topa is a female.
Yeah.
Should be female or male. Like, how should we do this that's going to be acceptable? By the way, amazing young actress playing that role.
Oh, she was incredible.
But yeah. Whether or not Seth knows any transgender people, I can't say. But it's, to me, it's about that issue for sure, but it's also about relationships and fathers and daughters and parents, and the core themes are universal. And the reason that perhaps some people are crying when they're watching the end of Midnight Blue, when Klyden comes back, has everything to do with a father and a daughter. And whatever issues they have, whether or not you relate directly to it, you relate to all of the emotions going on around it.
And I'm going to drill down on that scene in a little bit. But one of the things going on here too is that because the Moclan are created to be this ultimate misogynist society, like there is a thing in this world, unfortunately, that with genital mutilation is like a thing that happens sometimes, usually for control in a patriarchal sense. And so the whole Moclan culture and all those things, you guys have so much to play with there. It's not just an issue of, because it is an issue these days that a lot of people deal with, that their child comes home and says, I'm transgender. Now we as a family, we have to deal with this. But it goes a little bit deeper with the Topa storyline because it's also an issue of survival because of how, misogynist their culture is, right? So it comes into a totally different thing.
It's also about culture. It's about cultural differences. It's about identity, and everybody can relate to these things. Whether or not you're transgender yourself, or whether or not you're a Moclan, it shouldn't matter ultimately when it comes to what's happening emotionally.
Mhm. Right. And one of the things that's what was cool is so there's a YouTube personality, a woman that goes by the name Jessie Gender, who's a transgender like social critic, and she's and I mentioned her work before where she was talking about 7 of 9 and being on the spectrum. Well, we talked about that one of the times we talked before. And but I listened to her review of the Midnight Blue episode, and it was good because she was talking about how she related to a lot of the transgender issues in the episode Midnight Blue and was very happy with it. And
That's
how
great to hear, by the way. That's very, very good to hear.
yeah, and I would definitely say you should check out that review because
I'm going to.
yeah, from a very specific place of one of the things she talked about was the torture scene and the depersoning of Topa, like, and how this is an experience that she has constantly because she's a person that's out there on Twitter where people will insult and say these things to deperson her as a female, and and all these issues. And so for that scene, and she actually said that she was glad that you showed that whole scene where they basically torture her, because as hard as it was to watch, it was something that she related to and felt like it's something that transgender people go through emotionally all the time.
It starts on the shuttle ride, where she doesn't know why they've taken her or where she's going, and they're pretty brutal verbally. That's where the torture begins.
Right. And look, we've gotten to some heavy issues with Midnight Blue, but we got to talk about Dolly Parton too. Like, how did that happen? How did the idea of the Mocklin women, the underground community, being big Dolly Parton fans come about?
That's Seth. That was his genius idea. And I love Dolly Parton. Andre and I based that scene on a real life experience that I did some biographical research online, and I found this story about her, that she grew up in a cabin in the mountains, and this story where her toes got cut off. And we were looking for a story for her to tell that would resonate with the main story. In terms of whether or not we were going to get Dolly Parton when we were writing it, we really had no clue.
Right.
That was going to be Seth doing his thing. He had heard, I think, that she was loving the references to her on the show, that she liked the show. So I think we knew we had a shot. And it happened during COVID. It all went down during COVID. So I wasn't there when they shot it. They shipped the mountain set to Tennessee, where Dolly was, and shot the scene there. And
right.
Her part of it anyway. And so I'm bummed to say I didn't get to meet Dolly Parton, which I was so excited about when we wrote this pre-COVID. So I think I'm going to try to get her to autograph a script.
That would be great. Yeah.
It's that's the Orville at its best. It's resonant. It feels honest, but it's funny too. And somehow it's all working.
No, and everyone keeps wondering. I've seen a lot of people asking, was that her idea to wear the rainbow suspenders? Did she do that on her own? Or
that's a great question. I suspect that the wardrobe people on the Orville provided her with a costume.
Yeah.
But I can't say for sure. It's a very good question.
A lot of people have been asking that. It's been interesting to see that.
Yeah.
And I said I wasn't going to get into this show stuff, that I was going to stay under the hood as a writer, but
I don't know. It's a great question. I'll find out.
Well, and so it must have been so. I mean, did you ever think did you have a backup if he couldn't get Dolly Parton, or
nope.
You were just going to cut that scene?
No backup. Well, that's an important scene. That scene is a huge turning point.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, Dolly Parton
it's
saves
Dolly,
the day.
or it was Dolly or nothing.
Right.
So,
Right. Well, you guys pulled it off, and that was and that was great. So I think one of the I hate when people compare Orville and Star Trek to for a certain degree, because you and I have talked about this before. It's a big tent. There's room for everybody. We can have everybody. We all love Star Trek. We all love these things, but the one thing that you guys not being part of the Gene Roddenberry universe or being your own franchise is you get to make decisions kind of on your own, and you're creating. And so the trade union deciding not to respect Moclan culture and to make the decision based on the ethics of this one person's life. Now, I know you guys don't sit around and think about how radical this is for science fiction, but that decision, as I sat in my chair watching the episode, I thought very deeply about, whoa, that's something. The fact that they're choosing the ethics. So did you guys talk a lot about that decision, like as a writing room?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are huge plot maneuvers. You know, the Moclans leaving the Union was going to be a big deal politically and also personally, because now you have a Moclan family on the Orville who are going to have to leave their culture and disavow their home world. It was going to set up the huge events to come. And I think what you're liking about it, though, is that and this is even true to some extent in the episode Domino, you know, what we're defending are our ideals. You know, we're not just defending,
Yes.
and that's kind of a similar situation. Like a child was kidnapped and tortured, and that's we draw the line there. And I know Bortus said it best: you're liars and you're butchers.
Yeah.
In a very powerful scene. I knew when we were writing it, I got choked up. You know, the key to that scene is that Topa completely loves her dad so much that she is just happy to see him.
Yeah.
And the line, "Papa, you came back," gets me.
Yeah.
And it's one of those scenes there. I didn't let Andre see that I was choking up. Too embarrassing, but it was one of those things where I hoped it worked on the page, but you know, until it's, you know, on its feet, and you just never know for sure. And then when I saw the first time I saw the scene cut together, I was with Seth sitting right next to me, and he was showing me some scenes from the episode, and I was like, oh fuck.
Oh, here it comes.
I can't break down in front of Seth. I got to be cool. You know? No.
Let it fly.
But it's so beautifully acted, and it feels very earned dramatically. And I'm proud of it, because this is all about moving people. You know, there are big ideas and there's all this stuff, but none of that sticks if you haven't moved the audience. And that I was very happy to see, and it wasn't entirely clear till it aired how people were going to react to it. And
yeah,
I think,
and it was very powerful. And how did you feel after it aired? That had to be good feeling. That one.
It was, well, it certainly validated that I wasn't a complete ninny when I got choked up about it. It felt authentic, and it's all about. It's just such that all, despite all of the epic things happening in the episode, that it would all come down to this tiny little intimate moment between a father and a daughter. To me, was just great.
I just have a few more questions about Domino, because to me,
But you tell me, did you get choked up? Yes, you got choked up.
Yeah, I got choked up. I got choked up for that scene. Yeah, and the dog's worked up now about it. So, but yeah, I found that scene to be really powerful, and I think the performance with Bortus and Klyden, it's funny too because their relationship has so many hilarious moments that, and it was brutal when Klyden left, his daughter. So I think with the Bortus and Klyden storyline too, you get sweet moments with them in the last episode. When Klyden's the only one that really thinks he did a great job being best man. And it's funny because I tried to explain how funny that scene was to my wife that's not very into science fiction. And I was trying to explain how funny the all kidding aside thing was. And, I was like, okay, it doesn't translate. But let me tell you, it's partially like those, and I don't know those actors' names, but they've really done great work for making that.
Peter Macon and Chad Coleman.
Yeah, they've done a great job. And I think Klyden, if he didn't reject Topa originally and then come around, it wouldn't have been as powerful, and it really gave everyone watching that who are fans of the show a cathartic release.
Yep, absolutely.
And motorcycle. And all right, so Domino was a big deal for your last episode, and in a sense you kind of got to update a storyline you've done before with Scorpion and Voyager in a real smart way. Because the whole alliance between the Kaylon and the Union, which, you set up very well by having the Krill and the Mocklin kind of go through their thing earlier as well, right? And I loved that the Krill in this episode were and Talea was able to kind of confront their misogyny, and I thought that was just such a really great way to kind of turn things around, because you've set her up in this villainous role, and yes, she is a villain kind of in this situation, but she's right there, right? And the reason why I bring up Scorpion with Voyager, and that's one of my favorite storylines you did in Voyager, is because whoever saw Janeway making an alliance with the Borg, right? And she did it because she had to. But what was the cool updating here was, and this is the thing that I said to you in my first email that I sent you, was everything that the Union sacrifices in the episode Domino comes down to not protecting the Union's skin, because they're not under threat. They now have the weapon. They're not afraid of the Kaylon anymore. They don't have to be, but they sacrifice everything. And you have one character who specifically sacrifices everything for ideals, not for we have to save our planet, we have to save our solar system, we have to save our lives, we have to save our ideals. And in a sense, it's an updating of what you did with Scorpion, and I love seeing writers like be able to kind of update ideas they've already worked on. Is Janeway had to sacrifice her ideals to win and survive, which was great.
To get her family home, yes.
Exactly. But in this case, it's all about ideals, and it was so brilliant. I love that. Did you guys talk about that, or was that a happy accident of just where the storyline came together?
No, it absolutely. I mean, it's part of the story. I mean, characters are discussing when the weapon is invented. There's a very important scene with John Lamar and Charlie and some others the dinner table scene, talking about what are the ethical implications of this. I mean, there's a discussion at the Union Council. It's a big deal. We have a genocidal weapon at our disposal. How are we going to handle this? It was very much discussed and part of the DNA of the story.
Right. And I think too, it wasn't enough, so the super weapon in this thing, and I love the weight of the moment that that they have on the bridge, that they're really given a chance. You can see on their faces like, oh shit, what did we just do? And I think you guys giving power to that moment was really, really important right there.
Yeah, and astounding visual effects.
Yeah, and that reminds me, I remember when we were talking about in one of our last interviews, you said you were jealous of the effects on the new Star Trek. Well, you guys brought it this season. So
yeah, that's all Seth and Brandon Fayette, our visual effects supervisor, and Brooke Nuska, our visual effects producer. What can I say? I mean, I don't think I've never seen a space battle that big on TV.
Yeah, it was incredible.
I've been involved in a lot of space battles, and that one takes the cake.
Right. And so Burke's sacrifice, you guys were kind of setting this up the whole season.
Yeah, that was Seth's late. That was his idea. That was kind of like from the beginning, her character was introduced to be a point of view character for a lot of the audience, who was saying, how is this character allowed to be on the bridge?
Right.
But he knew it was his idea that she was going to sacrifice herself. It was even, I believe he pitched it to Ann Winters, the actress.
And then you had to be the one to figure out how she was going to do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the genocidal weapon, I'm not sure where that idea came in, if it came up at the end of the season or not. But
yeah, and another thing that's different from the Kalons, that's different with the Kalons from the Borg, is that they kind of redeem themselves. They learn from Burke's sacrifice, right? And especially coming to Isaac's wedding and the episode, and then of course the hilarious scene where the whole fleet shows up. Which is cool because you take this really dark episode and set up a joke for the next episode, and that's like, kind of the Orville in a nutshell right there. And so real brilliant there. But I also want to point out too, and I'm wondering if you guys thought about this, but I saw the very first comment I saw online. I have shout out to my buddy Ivan Zorik, who's lives in Portland, a friend of mine. He's a Serbian science fiction writer, and the first thing he said was about Domino was he posted, "This was New Hope level storytelling," and I didn't know what he meant. But then when I got to watching it, I was like, "Oh, it's the way the battle is formatted with the 3 storylines." Was that intentional?
Very much so. I can't remember how much of the final battle was worked out in the writer's room, but I do remember when we were writing the finals, Seth wanted he made it really clear. He wanted a big finale. He wanted a big finale to this storyline anyway. And I do remember thinking, the way to make this cinematic is to be intercutting between multiple action sequences. And I remember also thinking, good luck producing this.
Right.
Because, but again, that's all Seth and the visual effects team, and coming up with, and obviously not a cheap show. But we really wanted to, again, take everything to the next level. I mean, that's what New Horizons refers to. I mean, the ship got to refit the ship, the visual effects, and the storytelling. Those were, they all became more epic in scope.
Right. And it really pays off here. And when you say good luck producing that, as a writer, when you're sitting down at the computer, do you just let it fly and say, I'll
Yes.
trim back if I have
in this case, because the move to Hulu came with the dictum, we're going for it. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, normally when, Seth's the showrunner, if I'm the showrunner and I have budget constraints, I have to be thinking about these things. I may write a first pass that's crazy, but I can't turn a draft into production that is unproducible. People have to start prepping the damn thing. In this case, we just went for it. And right. not only did Seth and our team, our great director John Cassar and everybody put together an amazing episode, they actually added something that wasn't in the script. Originally, when Kelly and the gang have to abandon the shuttle to get down to the surface where the quantum core is, I think Andre and I had them parachuting, and they came up with this jetpack craziness that I think I never would have thought of. I just sort of thought it was completely
impossible to produce.
Impossible. But for anybody who might have been thinking out there, what took so long? Hopefully they saw what was going on.
Right. Yeah.
COVID plus.
Which I think is what people don't understand is the reality of why season 4 is not like a guarantee, because the actors' contracts were up, right? And
that's right.
Yeah.
The COVID complicated stuff, and 3 took so long to finish, not just because of COVID, but because of the complexity of what was on had to be shot.
So that gives us an in as we wrap things up to talk about the importance of Disney Plus. For those of us who would like to see more Orville, or I think the numbers on Disney Plus are gonna do a big thing. And if people don't already know, and they should, is that the Orville is coming to Disney Plus later this month, right? In August.
August 10th.
Oh, so it'll be there tomorrow. So when we're recording this, so before this comes out, so it's already there. So not only should you be binging it from the beginning and watching it again, because then again, this show is for writers under the hood. If you go back and watch it again, now you get to see how the writing evolved and how things got to change from season 2 to 3, and to see kind of Seth and Brannon and everybody unleashed, right?
Yeah. And look, we want to do a season 4. I know Seth would love to do another season, and we love the show. I mean, we love doing it, and I miss it already. So
yeah.
people have got to spread the word.
Yeah.
And get people to tune in.
Absolutely. And so on that note, you're also working on another project right now.
Yeah, I just finished. In fact, today I just wrapped everything up on a show called The End Is Nigh with starring Bill Nye, which is another show Seth and I cooked up, where it's an hour-long show where the first half hour is some kind of world-ending disaster, and the second half hour is how science can save us. And another big special effects driven fun show that drops on Peacock, a different streaming service, on August 25th, all 6 episodes. So check that out.
Well, we love the end of the world, and especially to see how science can save us, because
it's got the terrifying first half, but a very optimistic second half.
Awesome. Yeah. Any idea if you guys are gonna expand into? I know Seth did a novella, right, for one of the episodes. Are you guys gonna expand into books, comics, any of that kind of stuff? Do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what Seth has in mind. I think ideally we'd make more. It's a TV show first,
Mm.
but who knows?
All right. Uh, well, I just want to say again, like this season just really blew out my expectations. I expected to like it. I thought it was really great. It was super fun for me to see Shadow Realms because when you told me about it, I could see because I know the writer's glee of when you've got a story you love and you can't wait to tell. And and so it was very fun for me. I had a big stupid grin on my face watching it because I was like, "Oh, Brandon already told me about this one," and it was cool to see it realized.
Yeah,
And
and by the way, thank you for having me on your podcast. It is fun and unusual to discuss the writing process in this depth.
well,
So
that's what I do around here. And you know, the way I look at it is that I learn from these conversations. I learn from prepping just because now I went back and watched the Orville a second time, season 3, with the eye towards thinking about what you guys were doing under the hood, and that gives me a chance. And I think everyone, we love to watch stories, but writers out there, if you want to learn how to do these things, you got to go back and look at these things that way. And I always look at this podcast as an opportunity to learn from the greats. And Brandon, you've written a lot of my favorite episodes of Star Trek. Now, there's one thing I avoided Star Trek until this point for the most part, but we got to talk about the animated Threshold.
the one scene, the notorious scene.
Yes. So there's a guy, I don't know his name. I'm sorry. Shout out to the guy who does this. He did Best of Both Worlds as well. I don't know if you've seen that, but he made an animated, like Star Trek the animated series version of Threshold. What was that like watching your episode, your famous Too Close to the Sun episode of Voyager?
So it's an episode where Janeway and Paris devolve into salamanders, and Chakotay and Tuvok come upon them at the swamp's edge. And this person did a filmation style 1970s kind of crude, cheesy animation version of it, and it's with the actual dialogue and soundtrack and unchanged. And it is absolutely perfect. It's the better version of it. It almost redeemed the episode, its existence, because this clip exists. It's priceless, and I don't think it. I mean, it's just so great. I watched it several times. Please do more, whoever's doing these. Well, although there'll never be a scene that's more perfect than that, because that's truly a storyline that would have been relegated to the animated series.
You're too hard on Threshold. It lives. And wait, and you know what? I didn't ask you last time. Have you seen how much people still debate the Tuvix situation? Have you noticed this? People are still debating Tuvix.
Well, that was great. I mean, what more could we hope for? It was meant to be controversial. Yeah.
I'm with Janeway. I think she made the right decision, but I think you're right, but I don't know. By the way, I always say about that episode, it didn't start that way. It started as a more of a comedic type thing. Mm-hmm. And I hated I hated everything about it. Even the title is stupid. The idea is idiotic. But then the way we took it becomes one of the best episodes somehow. Right. And again, that's what I love about
science fiction is you can take sometimes the goofiest idea and turn it into something really profound.
Awesome. All right. Well, Brannon, it was a delight to talk to you about Orville season 3, and everybody go out and watch it on Disney Plus. And
is nigh August 25th, Peacock.
August 25th on Peacock. I will be spreading the gospel on that one too. Did you see the thing where there was a meme going around that was saying that Dolph Lundgren had more degrees in science than Bill Nye? And I was like, the funny thing about it was, I thought that, I was like, wait a second now.
Is that true?
Bill Nye is still the science guy.
Here's the thing, what. I'm not sure. I can't say for sure, but
well, Dolph Lundgren is underrated for the amount of
Bill's a science. He's a mechanical engineer, by trade, but he's also a science communicator.
Well, that's just exactly right.
There's a he's not defining reality for you. He's simply communicating scientific concepts clearly. It helps to have, do you have to have a degree in astronomy to make an astronomical idea clear? I think those people just don't, or they're just, and by the way, I don't know if that's true about Dolph Lundgren.
Dolph Lundgren actually has a lot of degrees in like biochemical science, something, but doesn't matter. What is true is that Bill Nye, well, first of all, a lot of the greatest discoveries in astronomy have been made by amateur astronomers. So amateur astronomy is actually a big deal.
Michael Faraday, who discovered electromagnetism, and we wouldn't be talking on these devices right now if it weren't for him, had no formal education and couldn't even do the math. He had to have someone else who could do the math, prove his crazy ideas on paper. Like I don't have a college degree.
I was just kidding, but I love Bill Nye. I'm so
what am I doing writing anything having to do with science? I don't even have I don't have a degree in anything.
Well, and it's a smart move. I think you found an awesome niche with helping with Cosmos, and I really appreciate the role you played in bringing Cosmos back. And I think having these kind of science and science fiction adjacent shows is really great. It's one of the great things that you're doing. So I appreciate the work, sir.
Thank you. And I look forward to reading your new novel. Send it to me as soon as you can.
Hey, it's already in the mailbox. And by the time this comes out, the title's out there. So I can say The Last Night to Kill Nazis from Clash Books, May 2023. So I haven't been able to say that, Brannon, for the last year. I've had to keep it secret.
The title alone, I can't wait.
All right. It was great to talk to you, and see you later, folks. Okay. And I'm sure Brannon will be back at some point, hopefully to talk Orville season 4 someday.
I hope so.
All right.
Okay, man.